Hello and welcome to my channel and welcome to a new thing that I don't know how long I'll do but wanted to do. Welcome to Friday Rants. Today's Friday rant is about spending mostly by governments but also by Americans in general. It's a common thing for Americans to spend their money poorly. Part of that is because we have so many options, it's difficult to make that determination. I remember last year around this time shopping in Belize. When I was buying things, it didn't dawn on me until the third day we were in Belize why the people were looking at me with the looks of confusion that I was getting. I think it's very rare for people in other countries to simply walk into a store and buy whatever they want. They were probably particularly confused by the fact that I, 50 or sometimes 100 miles away from the coast, and speaking German and having a beard, was walking into a store and buying whatever I liked without regard for how much it costs. I remember very vaguely as a child a few times walking into a store and watching people buy things as they counted the money in their hands and decided what they were going to keep on the band and what they were going to not actually purchase that day. And so imagine if you live in a country where everyone who looks and sounds like me is Amish and has no money, to watch an Amish man walk into a store and put a $20 American banknote on the band and buy whatever it is that he likes and get change. See, Americans have this misbegotten notion that we're somehow bereft and suffering because things aren't peachy keen all the time. But and this is partially because we have a glut of merchandise. Even during the pandemic of 2020, you could go into a store and there were still things on the shelves. They may not have been things you wanted, but they were things to buy. And except for, now there was nothing that I needed to buy during the pandemic that I couldn't get. There were times I would walk in and not want to wait in line to see if I could get something. And there were times when I walked in intending to buy something that I didn't buy it because it was absent. But these were things I was replenishing old stock and not because I'd actually run out. So Americans, most Americans, live hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck. I don't know what the actual figure is. It's something like 75%. And it's only like 9% of Americans who earn more than $100,000 a year. And so as many rich people as we do have this rich lifestyle and this luxuriation mentality where we can basically have almost anything we want anytime we want it if we're willing to shell out the money. And so it should be no stretch of the imagination for our leaders to do the same thing. Almost 30 years ago now, a certain, now probably and hopefully retired politician once made this comment. He said, quote, and I remember because my father had just gone to war, and this was a comment about the costs of war. He said, quote, "A billion here, a billion there, and pretty soon it adds up to real money," end quote. And now, in the past 12 months, we've had politicians spending trillions as if it's trivial. And a trillion is a million billions. So as expensive as a fighter jet might have been in 1991, you can get a million of them for $1 trillion, assuming that we were taking this money back to 1991. And it concerns me how they frit and throw away money as if it grows on trees, as if all they have to do is print more, as if there's no end to the number of rich people that they can tax. Somebody has to pay for this. And I'm annoyed when I see certain news outlets who are critical of only one side and how they're going to spend it and then praise it on the other. And I don't care what side you're on, somebody has to pay for this. Someone criticized me at the very beginning when the first stimulus check came out about taking the money. Well, if you're so principled, why did you take it? And I explained to them, because this is money I'm essentially borrowing from myself. And if I don't take the money, I'm essentially cutting off my nose to spite my face. And I am going to have to pay myself back for a loan I threw away. That doesn't mean that there are lots of people who haven't simply thrown away their stimulus checks. I don't know what most people bought, and I don't really care. But but I'll bet you bottom dollar that most of them didn't spend it very wisely. When you didn't have to do anything for it except exist, people don't tend to use something very wisely for which they have not had to work or for which they have not had to sacrifice. A former founding father of ours once said, "That which we obtain easily we esteem lightly," end quote. And I think that's what we're seeing here, is that when it becomes so easy, so automatic, and when the clamor of the populace is so large to spend money and hand it out, it becomes easy to simply spend money without having to ask where it comes from. Except for if it were you and I, eventually we're reduced to one of two options: borrowing at confiscatory rates or going bankrupt. The governments seem to think that this is a malady from which they are immune and from which they will not have to suffer. But there is not a nation on the earth that has not at one point gone through a point where their money was essentially absolutely worthless. We haven't had that happen in America because our society has never faced that kind of financial responsibility. No one has ever held us accountable for it because we're a transplant society that came here that isn't all that old. And in our 230 plus years of existence as a nation, independent from the rule of Great Britain, we have not come this close to pissing away money that we don't have. And we are writing checks that we cannot cash. And politicians, I guess, don't care because they're just going to kick it down the road to the next guy and make it his problem. When the pandemic started, some of my coworkers, in discussing with me the fact that I had made preparations, asked me questions. And one of the answers to one of those questions was that I had put things aside, not because I knew this was coming. I knew it could come, but I was not sure when or how it would come or what it would actually affect me. But I said, I know that one day the bill comes due, and it would be foolish of me to live my life expecting that it will not come in my time and then having nothing to pay the piper when he comes. If you're familiar with the story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, the Pied Piper of Hamelin comes in, does a job, and the city doesn't pay him. And so, as a consequence, he plays his flute, captures the children in a trance, and leads them out of town and takes away the children. That is essentially what we are allowing to happen. And whether we're saddling our children, well, your children, because I don't have any, saddling your children to pay bills in the formation of which they had no say, or whether someday someone will come here and take the things from us that are dearest to us, the Pied Piper of Hamelin is a harbinger and a warning about this lackadaisical attitude about spending trillions without making any accommodation for how it's going to be paid. If you walk into a restaurant with no intention of paying, you have two options. You get caught and have to pay it somehow, maybe by paying your debt to society in prison, or by running away from that. And you can only run away from your mistakes for so long before they catch up with you. Not necessarily because they figure it out, but because it sets up a pattern of behavior that eventually gets so big that it can't help but collapse around you. And that's what I'm worried about. I don't know how many trillions were spent last year trying to save the economy from governors who refused to let stores open. And the current administration is not doing any better. Joe Biden has been in office barely longer than a week, and he's already talking about spending $2 trillion in stimulus money. And I'm sorry, but eventually we can't keep that up. Eventually someone has to pay the bill. And it's probably going to be you or someone that you claim that you love. And what kind of a person does that to someone that they love? And maybe that's the problem. Maybe our problem is we have become too selfish, too proud, too envious, too full of enmity to actually do what is right. And if that's the case, then woe be unto this nation, because there will be some serious suffering. And maybe Americans will finally know what it's like to be a member of every other society, every other civilization that has ever risen and fallen. I am hoping that I am not living in the time to watch the fall of the United States, but we might be. $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there, and pretty soon it adds up to real problems. And so while billions may add up to real money, trillions will add up to real disaster, real suffering, and real problems. And Joe Biden may go down in history as a historic president for reasons he may wish had never been. Have a good Friday. Have a good weekend. Stay warm. Stay safe. Oh, be wise. What can I say more?